15 minutes later, after emptying my bladder and getting refreshments, I had just rejoined the others at the view screen when the entry chimes sounded. Wilma and Bastion Williams Pompous are waiting outside, Omu reported. Oh, good, they were able to make it, Hannah exclaimed. Please see them in, Omu, I said as the android sprung to its feet, anticipating my request. When Omu released and opened the door, young Bastion ran past her with barely a glance. The boy made a beeline directly to Nana Hannah, causing all of us to smile. Wilma entered and greeted Omu, who directed her toward our group. I stood up to introduce her to my son, grandson, and Adele. When she met Adele and learned that the watch party was being recorded for posterity, Wilma seemed to grow nervous and shy. She also looked curiously at the temporarily abandoned shell of the Princess of Mars, but was polite enough to not ask. Omu, if Her Highness is not going to join us for the finale, please direct her augment to move the shell to one of the back chairs so our new guest can have a prime seat, I said. If Ben was bothered by my somewhat brazen request, he kept it to himself. Instead, he stood and helped Wilma get seated into the newly vacated space next to him. I was happy to see that Alec and Ben quickly made Wilma feel at home. Hannah was listening raptly as Bastion whispered to her animatedly, probably catching her up on his recent activities. The group's attention was brought back to the ongoing attack when a new window opened on the viewer. It was showing the Sarissa wormhole already deep into energizing for activation. Seconds later, the wormhole formed, and a sensor stalk was inserted into the aperture. The countdown to impact dropped below 3 minutes. The view switched from third person to the point of view from the sensor's telescope. At first, the view panned around the distant star field, getting its bearings. Soon, it found and zoomed in on a fuzzy, dumbbell-shaped object. From the object's small size, the Sarissa wormhole must have been positioned at some distance from the enemy arc. How far is the observation wormhole from the arc? I asked. 45,000 kilometers, Omu replied. Simultaneously, a new indicator appeared on the map chart display, a green point near the top of the map labeled Sarissa. It was noticeably further out from the arc than the 3 microprobes sent earlier. Also prominent on the map was a long red dashed line slowly drawing closer to the arc, the trace tracking the terminal approach of the first pair of missiles. The number displayed below the trace included a timer reading just under 90 seconds and the distance remaining, which was at 22,000 kilometers and dropping fast. 3 similar traces were headed toward the arc, but were still much further away. These represented the 3 following missile pairs, and their timers were showing just over 11 minutes, 14 minutes, and 23 minutes until impact. 1 minute, Ben said excitedly. He was on the edge of his seat, and I quickly surveyed the others to find varying levels of excitement and anxiety on display. Adele, who was the only adult younger than Ben, looked nervous. She kept checking that her imager was functioning and was probably controlling her anxiety by focusing on her duties. I couldn't read Deja, the youngest adult present, because she was still off in virtual being royal. For a moment, I considered using Naomi's override to pop into her virtuality to spy, but I was nowhere near curious enough about the princess to do something as underhanded as that. Besides, if I had spied and found that she was tuning out today's events, I don't think I would have been able to hide my disappointment from Ben. Bastion, the youngest attendee, was still sitting in Hannah's lap, quietly watching the map display, but also occasionally whispering with Hannah. I looked at my old friend to see if the boy was bothering or distracting her, but she looked serene, far calmer than I would have expected. I realized with a smile that the young lad being here was just the right thing to settle her nerves. She was truly destined to nurture and rear children. I looked to Ambassador Riho and found she was studying me as I took in the group. She was smiling also and just gave me a nod before turning back to the view screen. Ben had just started audibly counting down from 30 seconds when there was a bright flash from the window relaying the Sarissa spotting scope. Oh, Alex said excitedly. That's way too early. There was a second bright flash that formed at the edge of the rapidly dimming but still expanding ball of plasma centered on the location of the original flash. The first weapon detonated prematurely at 29.4 seconds and at 7,258 kilometers distance from the enemy arc. The second weapon detonated 0.8 seconds later at 7,126 kilometers distance, Omu reported. I looked to my ex-wife for her reaction, but was met with the blank expression of someone who had already dropped into virtual. Of course, she would want access to all the data we'd gathered regarding the premature detonations. Alec, Ben, Riho, and Wilma soon followed, dropping out of the reel to troll for more data in virtual. I debated on whether to follow them into the digital realms, but decided to stay here with Hannah, Bastian, and Adele. Besides, Omu would inform me of any new data discoveries or if my active presence was needed in the public forum. Additional data appeared near the large explosions. The estimates of observed explosive yields matched those predicted for the amounts of antimatter each warhead contained. "Damn it! 7,250 clicks!" I exclaimed, smacking the armrest of the sofa. At that distance, the warhead explosion was probably too far from the Ark to cause damage? "That is a logical assumption, John," Omu replied. "The AI Advisory Council has reviewed the Sarissa imagery multiple times and has detected an anomalous energy signature near the time and location of the first weapon's detonation. The anomaly occurred 0.9 seconds before the first weapon exploded. Further discrimination and analysis is ongoing, but it is highly probable that the anomaly caused the loss of the first weapon. Also, the failure of the second weapon is almost certainly due to its proximity to the first explosion, as the second weapon's antimatter containment field would not have withstood the intense gamma saturation from the first. We've programmed the other three missile pairs to travel further apart, right?" Hannah asked. "That is correct, Hannah," Omu replied. "As planned, the first pair remained in close proximity to one another to better preserve the element of surprise. With that no longer being a consideration, the following missiles' courses were programmed to diverge to a much greater extent." "Maybe that will help them evade whatever got the first missile," I commented. "That remains a possibility. Also, there was a slight possibility that the first missile detonated simply by accident. The containment fields are not infallible after all," Omu reminded me. I hadn't forgotten bad luck. None of our warheads had exploded by accident back at the munitions depot. Yet. But it was theorized that if the correct type of random, ultramassive, cosmic ray particle collided with the delicately balanced suspension fields, there could be an accidental explosion. We'd so far dodged that bullet by sheer good luck. I had to admit our luck was probably due for balancing. Let's hope it was indeed just bad luck, and that the enemy has no way to counter the remaining 3 salvos, I said. The grim expressions on the faces of the others indicated that they remained doubtful. "Uncle John?" Bastian asked. "Uncle?" I looked at the smiling Hannah, who just shrugged. "Yes, little guy," I replied, my worry now replaced with a smile. "Does this mean that we can't beat the Ark aliens?" "No, not at all," I replied soothingly. "Today's attack was just the first attempt. More of a test, really. We had expected there to be problems and needed to see what would happen and how the enemy would respond. Now smart people will go figure out what went wrong with the first missile and come up with a better plan." He frowned, still looking worried. "Remember, Bastian," I continued, "the enemy Ark is still over a century away. We've got a lot of time to stop it. You will be all grown up and old when the Ark finally passes by our solar system. Heck, you may one day be the scientist who finally figures out how to defeat the assemblage." Bastian's expression morphed from worry into wonder as he considered what I'd told him. I caught Adele backing away with her imager and giving me a thumbs-up gesture. She'd noticed our interaction and had moved in to capture it intimately. I was momentarily pissed at the intrusion and was debating on whether to have Naomi erase Adele's footage of the encounter. But I decided to let it stand, as I'd agreed to have everything be recorded, and I did trust Adele to not exploit or distort the true account of what was happening. On the view screen, the Sarissa window winked out. I put my irritation at Adele's imaging behind me to again focus on the ongoing attack. "What's happening?" I asked Omu. "As planned, the Sarissa surveillance wormhole has been temporarily suspended," the android reported. "This was to save energy reserves on Vesta, and also out of caution due to increased electromagnetic scanning emissions now ongoing in the vicinity of the Ark. The wormhole will be reformed in 6 minutes to observe the closure of the second pair of missiles." We'd kicked the hornet's nest, and although we'd expected our first missiles would cause the enemy to become alert to our attacks, it would have been nice if they'd also had to deal with damage control from a successful impact. Unfortunately, it looked like the undamaged Ark would be able to devote its full awareness to watching for additional warheads. Omu, did the Sarissa record anything happening on the surface of the Ark just before the warhead exploded? Hannah asked. Nothing has been detected as of yet, Omu replied. This may be due to the limited view of the Ark from the fixed location observation telescope. It is possible that the closer position microprobes will have recorded something, however. I sure hope we will still be able to retrieve the 3 probes now that we've awakened the enemy, I muttered. The probes are very stealthy, Omu explained. Even if full physical retrieval proves impossible, the Sarissa wormhole only requires a few seconds in the vicinity of each probe to retrieve its recorded data via burst transmission. That was true. It also meant that if we could clandestinely retrieve the probe's data via burst transmission, they could continue to remain in place, watching and recording. They were set to destroy themselves automatically when their batteries were depleted or if they were detected and about to be captured or physically inspected. A new countdown appeared showing 4 minutes until the Sarissa wormhole was reformed to scout the next weapon's arrival. I suddenly felt the urge to fetch myself another shot of Martian whiskey. Omu broke the tension when she reported, "The AI Advisory Council has just confirmed that the detected anomaly was responsible for the loss of the first weapon. Using enhanced discriminating filter algorithms recently developed for the Argus array, a compact fusion event occurred which released a coherent energy discharge. This discharge appears to have been targeted on the first missile, causing it to fail by either direct physical damage or by oversaturation of its antimatter containment field, or both." I tried to parse the new information. "What does that mean exactly, Omu?" "While more data will be required to rule out other mechanisms, it is probable that the enemy destroyed our weapon with a directed energy particle lance. The impetus of the lance being a small fusion device, pre-positioned in a location trailing the enemy Ark," Omu explained. "A mine?" Hannah asked. "Yes, Hannah, a mine with a standoff destructive capability would be the most logical assumption." "Omu, why does this sound familiar to me?" I asked. Had I dreamt of something like this? If you recall, Naomi employed similar technologies in its orbital attack on the Master AI space station, now referred to as High Castle, Omu explained. Hannah looked confused, so I added, "Back when Naomi and I defeated the Master AI, we distracted its awareness before our cyborgs infiltrated its space station. This distraction was by an attack using missiles armed with standoff warheads. The missiles were intercepted, but not before they triggered their warheads, which, despite happening at some distance from the enemy space station, still caused damage by high-energy directed particle jets." I turned to Omu. "We used big fission bombs for those missiles. I take it that the no-fission byproducts were detected from the Ark anomaly?" "Correct, John. The lack of detected fission byproducts would indicate that a small fusion-only device powered the directed particle streams. The logical method of fusion initiation being by transmitted DET energy from the Ark itself. This conclusion is reinforced by data learned from the Picket persona regarding the enemy's usage of antimatter." "I'm not following, Omu," I admitted. Omu continued, "Any compact fusion device capable of inducing particle streams like was detected would require advanced gamma-energy diffraction technologies similar to those used to fully harness antiproton energy. You will recall that such technologies were recently discovered by Aux for use in the deceleration stages employed on each of the 3 interstellar vessels thus far launched by humans." "Ah, now I understood the point the android was making. The news that the assemblage possessed similar technologies to that which I thought we'd developed supposedly on our own was troubling. I wondered what else had they developed. Had they also discovered wormhole technology? Or did they understand enough wormhole theory to be actively watching for our use of wormholes? What if they had the ability to make wormholes, but simply lacked the energy needed to freely utilize them? Were they holding back energy to use wormholes if there was a dire need? Like maybe a dire need such as our attack? I felt myself beginning to panic as my mind ran away into speculation. "Omu, has there been any indications that the assemblage is using or understands wormhole theory?" I finally asked. "None at this time, John. 4 of the previously deployed Scout sensor probes contained subspace pocket gravimetric interferometers, none of which detected the telltale signature of wormhole aperture formation. Omu explained. I recall that we'd been developing methods to remotely detect wormhole usage. The current focus of these detection methods was to scan for the slight tugs in the local gravity field created whenever the wormhole machinery tore open a sizable hole in space. The amount of gravimetric distortion created depended on the size of the wormhole. So far, we'd been able to remotely detect the creation of larger apertures, but the smaller diameter wormholes like the microcom portals remained evasive. Also, the interferometers worked better the closer they physically were to the forming wormhole. That our scouting probes had not detected any wormholes only meant that they had not detected any wormholes of decent size. This meant that the enemy could still have the technology, but was limiting it to only micro-hole communication at this time. Additionally, the closest of the spotting microprobes currently deployed near the enemy arc contains a newly developed, more advanced pocket interferometer, Omu added. With its current relatively close proximity to the enemy arc, the microprobe's interferometer should be capable of detecting wormhole aperture formations as small as 5 centimeters. Another reason to hope for the success of the pending Sarissa data retrieval mission to the microprobes. I took a deep breath to get my worry under control. Occam's razor pointed towards the assemblage not having the technology. I decided that until we knew for sure, it was not worth worrying about. As the countdown to the next missile pair's arrival continued ticking down, the others began to trickle back from where they'd gone in virtual. Ben was first to return, followed by Riho and Wilma. Alec remained in virtual, and at my gesture, Omu informed me that he was going to remain in virtual with his mother. The window from Sarissa opened, and we watched as the scout wormhole formed a second time. The sensor probe was inserted into arc space as before, but this time on the opposite side of the arc. The view again switched to the point of view of the sensor's telescope, and shortly after, the magnified enemy arc was visible. The arc appeared much smaller this time as the second sensor wormhole had been created at nearly twice the distance of the first. The extra distance was both because we expected the enemy would be looking harder and also because we were leaving our wormhole active much longer. Since the duration between the second and third salvos was only 3 minutes, we intended to leave the sensor wormhole active until after the third pair of missiles arrived on target. I held my breath as the countdown to missile arrival dropped below 50 seconds, about 20 seconds before the time when the first missile had been destroyed. I found myself rapidly switching between the map display and its crawling missile traces in the live image from the deployed sensor. As each second ticked off, I mentally braced myself for the sudden harsh glare of a detonating warhead. The deployed sensor is detecting a much higher level of energy emanating from the enemy arc, Omu reported. It only made sense that the now fully alert enemy had increased its radar and visual scanning. The map display indicated the increased activity by showing red searching arcs emanating from the enemy arc. There were also energy emissions being emitted from a half-dozen points behind the arc at distances of over 26,000 kilometers. 5 emission sources other than the arc have been detected. This confirms that the enemy has independent platforms traveling in formation with the main arc, Omu added. This time, just as the countdown passed 37 seconds, we were able to see the anomalous energy released directly. I was just able to process the smaller flash when the screen went white from the much bigger flash. Shit, Hannah cursed, causing the small boy still in her lap to giggle. Sorry, she said embarrassed, looking at Wilma. Bastion's mother, still focused on the view screen, hadn't noticed. I looked quickly back to the map display. The indication for the first missile of the approaching pair had been replaced by a large X. The second trace was still closing on the enemy, however. Missile number 3 destroyed at 30.48 seconds, or approximately 8,700 kilometers from impact, Omu reported, speaking quickly. Missile number 4 is still on. The android was interrupted by a new flare on the just now recovering sensor image. This time it was Wilma who cursed. Correction, the 4th missile has also been destroyed. Time of destruction, 28.06 seconds, or approximately 8,050 kilometers from target. Son of a bitch, I muttered, mostly to myself. The rest kept their thoughts to themselves as Omu reported random bits of data about the second failed salvo. The countdown continued for the third pair of missiles. At around 90 seconds remaining, a new window appeared next to the others. It was showing a blurry, very magnified view of the long, tapering inner shaft of the Ark. Multiple objects have been detected being launched from the surface of the enemy Ark, Omu reported. From analyzing the reflected energy emissions from the Ark itself, the AI Advisory Council has concluded that the size of each new device is approximately 8 meters in diameter. Early indications are that the objects are maneuvering under their own control and heading towards the rear quarter of the Ark. New mines to replace those that have been expended? Ben asked. A logical assumption, Omu replied. Too little is yet known about the objects to make a full determination. Omu, will the new objects be in position in time to intercept the next pair of missiles? I asked. No, John. The new objects are moving slowly and won't have cleared the aft bulbous end of the Ark before weapons 5 and 6 arrive. The directed energy lances fired from the mines were line of sight only so the aft end of the Ark would protect our missiles. I would also suspect that the mines needed to be a certain distance away from the Ark before they could be safely utilized. Still, if the enemy was launching replacement mines now, that meant the current fleet of mines was finite in number. Maybe the remaining coverage was thin enough that our remaining missiles had a chance, and the remaining 4 missiles were traveling 20% faster. Maybe their minefield was too depleted to catch them this time? Omu spoiled my growing excitement instantly. Missile number 5 has just been destroyed. The window displaying the Sarissa telescope view panned further from the Ark quickly until an expanding ball of brilliant white energy overwhelmed the display. Missile number 5 had been intercepted so far from the Ark that it had happened outside the field of view of our sensor. Almost immediately, filters kicked in, dimming the harsh glare and revealing the same expanding ball of plasma we'd seen from the other interceptions. Time of destruction was 76 seconds before missile impact. Distance was over 22,000 kilometers, Omu reported almost stoically. I glanced at my android friend and caught a digital frown on her expression. I am sorry, John, Omu said consolingly, but remember, we are obtaining valuable intelligence. Riho's dull expression showed that she'd returned to virtual. I was sure it was due to the fact that there were many magnitudes of data available in the digital realm over what was being displayed on my simple wall screen. Ben and Wilma remained but looked sullen. Hannah's expression was strained. She stood up with Bastion and headed for the kitchen unit, probably to distract him and herself with a snack. She'd only made it halfway when Omu reported missile number 6's destruction. So ended salvo number 3. No one spoke for over a minute as the explosions dissipated and the Sarissa sentry was withdrawn, suspending our wormhole coverage. The observing telescope would return in 8 minutes to follow the last pair of missiles. With the loss of the first 3 salvos, none of us had much hope that the 4th would make it through to the Ark. Sure enough, 10 minutes later the show was over. The final score was 0-8 as all of our missiles had been intercepted before reaching the enemy. Alec, Riho, and Uxe had returned from virtual shortly after the Sarissa observation wormhole was suspended the final time. One bit of good news was that it seemed that our wormhole sensor had not been spotted, nor had Sarissa detected the self-destruction of any of our microprobes, indicating that those had likely not been spotted either. This meant there was a decent chance that they would remain undetected until the small wormhole was sent back in to retrieve them or their data. This was scheduled to occur 30 hours from now, after Vesta's energy reserves had been replenished. The delay would also give the enemy time to stand down its current heightened awareness level, we hoped. 3 hours later, after sharing a nearly silent evening meal with an equally preoccupied Riho, I was alone in my makeshift study trying to find solace by painting. I let my thoughts wander as my brushes moved across the canvas, creating a strange landscape my deeper mind had conjured up from the ether. As I worked, I was surprised to find that I was not depressed over our failed attack. Well, maybe there was a touch of melancholy, but mainly I felt resolved. The mood had been somber when the watch party had broken up earlier. There had been a half hour of quiet discussion. Ux had reported on a few additional bits of data she'd discovered while in virtual. Ben and Daisha had been the first to leave, with the princess's augment guiding her shell. She'd chosen to remain in virtual, which I found bothered me less than I'd have expected. Ben had been bothered, though, and I noticed him visibly composing himself when her shell had uttered a single monotone goodbye as it exited. I had held back a smirk as I watched her augment-guided shell follow him out this door like a puppy. I would see them both tomorrow when the three of us and Omu toured the Phobos complex. Wilma and Bastion were the next pair to leave. The little guy looked tired, but had still given Nana Hannah a hug that made us all smile. Ux left next along with Adele. Both would be departing Elon second and heading back to Phobos via shuttle. I'd suggested bumping her up the critical needs queue to use the wormhole, but she'd decline, saying that she used the travel time to rest. Adele was going with Ux, as she would be staying with my ex-wife tonight in preparation for filming my laboratory tour of the Phobos installation tomorrow. Alec and Hannah had been the last to depart, and although they left together, I don't think they had left as a couple. I'd see them again 2 days from now at the scheduled forum briefing to go over the intel learned from today's failed attack. Although the meeting would happen in virtual, Uxai, Raiho, and I planned to meet physically beforehand at my ex-wife's lab. Alec and Hannah were attending in virtual only as our guests. There would be hundreds of others from all across the solar system attending the virtual briefing, with most being higher-level scientists and engineering specialists, along with the more interested directors. Despite the planned high attendance numbers, I expected the meeting to be productive and to the point, as only a select core group would be allowed to actively participate. The rest of those attending would be observing only, although they could interact with the AIs freely if they wished. I'd insisted on this condition before I had agreed to attend. This early in the active war was no time to let our decision-making devolve into large committee gridlock or politicking. "That is an interesting landscape, John," Riho exclaimed from over my shoulder, interrupting my recollections. I stepped back to consider my work. As always, I was surprised at what my creative brain had accomplished while I had been lost in my thoughts. "It is very stark, almost sterile," she commented, almost questioningly. "It is a scene from Earth, from a long time ago, around 500 years after the enemy destroyed my civilization. I find it familiar, for some reason," she said curiously. "That's not surprising," I replied quietly. "The scene is that of my acreage in North America, just after I had awakened from my first half-millennium-long biosuspension. The world, especially the part where I lived, had been virtually wiped clean of life. All that I had found upon awakening was lichen and pond scum. Yes, from my research, I have found that your world was much more heavily damaged by the assemblage than was Hemhome," Riho said, using the now commonplace human nickname substitute for her world's name. Like every human, in her human shell, the alien ambassador found the world's true name inarticulable. Our silence stretched, and I went back to work, dabbing on paint to highlight the setting sunlight reflecting on the still frozen side of a ravine. "You are a very strong-willed person to have survived such solitude," Riho remarked. "I was broken, Zao, but in some ways that brokenness kept the remorse away. Later, when I learned the truth that what had happened to my world had been planned, and who was responsible, the anger I felt kept me motivated. My creativity evaporated, and I decided to call the work complete. I signed my initials in fine ink-like red paint, Bob Ross style. After sealing my remaining paints and tossing my soiled brushes and other consumables into the reducer, I headed off to the shower. Riho had already bathed, but waited with me while I finished readying myself for bed. After we'd consoled each other horizontally, twice we held each other in silence as we recovered. I'd left the bedchamber's big viewport open, and the room was illuminated by the reflected reddish glow of Mars's daylit side. The shadows slowly slid around the room as the station rotated, and soon after the room was plunged into almost full darkness as our orbit took us around the Martian horizon and into night. I noticed that Riho had not used her implant to quickly go to sleep, and found that she was still contemplating the events of earlier. I was surprised to learn that the alien wasn't bothered in the least by the failed attack. She reminded me that today's result had been somewhat expected, as we'd used the slower, less maneuverable original warhead design. The improved versions would be more resilient, and we'd be launching them using new tactics based upon what we learned today. In other words, she reminded me that it was too soon to give in to panic. She also explained that it was likely that the assemblage still believed that today's attack had come from an enemy they'd left far in their past. Thus, they were still unaware that their greatest danger lay ahead. My mind wandered. Do you think the attack launched by your species failed as spectacularly as ours did today? I asked Riho. I was referring to the antimatter explosions the Argus array had detected 2 years earlier. It was commonly believed that the Hemru had been responsible for those energy releases. Despite the fact that the alien ambassador had no memories of her species launching any long-range attack, even Riho agreed with our reasoning on the matter. With the ease at which the enemy repulsed the attacks today, I suspect any likely launch by the Hemru failed in a similar manner, she said. Or possibly it had partially succeeded, and today we saw the results of a hardened defense created by the assemblage in the aftermath of the Hemru attack. Either way, we now have a better understanding of what we will need to change in the future. I yawned as I considered her statement. Riho told me to go to sleep as I had a big day tomorrow. She then triggered her implant, leaving me with no excuse not to do the same. My fatigue did the job for me, and I soon followed her into slumber. Transfer shuttle, close orbit around Phobos. 18 hours later, Saturday, December 9th, 3116. Radiation alert, Ben announced. Her Royal Highness Deja Nothoris sat up, looking panicked at Ben's statement. I almost slipped and let my amusement at her reaction show. I checked my own readout and saw that my own exposure alert was about to activate. The levels were rising, but were still only at the slightly hazardous level. We'd be out of the area before our cumulative doses became troublesome. We'll be fine, I said calmly, as I extracted my limbs from the gravity cradle and pulled myself up to the handhold ring around the starboard porthole. We were currently on the final segment of our transfer orbit between Elon II and the small moon. As we approached the final engine firing point at Apogee on the far side of Phobos, our course was around the trailing side of the moon and taking us very low over the atomic dynamo fields. I quickly spotted the first of the massive fission magnetoplasma dynamic dynamos which had just come over the close Phobos horizon. The tall, heavily built structure was casting long shadows with the low lighting angle from the sun. More of the hellish engines came into view as our shuttle continued to approach. There were over 24 of the gigantic smokestacks of death which provided the energy for the big wormhole complex on the moonlet's far side. As our angle of view changed, I was able to spot the swollen blister at the base of each engine. These were the storage tanks for the huge quantities of uranium tetrabromide, which fueled the open fission cycle engines. Earlier, we'd passed the small fuel refinery space station in a polar orbit around the moon. There, uranium arriving from the asteroid belt was isotopically separated and blended with bromide, which had been brought up from the ancient Martian alluvial floodplains where it had been mined. The refinery also processed enormous quantities of Martian polar ice melt into salt water for use as a delivery medium. Even though the power complex was currently idle, the dynamo array fields remained very hot, both thermally and radiologically speaking, and I was glad we were not going to linger. I spotted movement and used my irises to zoom in on the activity. It looked to be a fuel delivery tanker shuttle in the process of unloading its cargo. There was a swarm of radiation-tolerant mobile units flitting about, assisting the delivering. Ben pulled himself up to the thick, shielded porthole next to me and exclaimed, "Wow, that's a lot of complex-looking hardware." "Yes, it's impressive. Too bad we can't see the dynamo in operation." Her Highness found the courage to join us at the porthole. I caught her staring at me with a strange expression and realized she had not found my comment humorous. "He's just joking, Deja," Ben said. Of course I was, and she should have known that. If even one of the engines below had been currently firing, from our location it would have been as if a star were ablaze just outside the shuttle. We'd have lasted, well, put it this way, it would have been a toss-up if we would have had time to realize that we were now instantly blinded before we vaporized. My dosimeter alert flashed again. Our exposure totals were now really rising quickly, and I felt my anxiety rising until I parsed the data. We were still safe, and as the shuttle was already halfway over the dynamo field and leaving the area, our exposure rates were already beginning to subside. I spared a moment to look around the shuttle pod, appreciating the heavily shielded interior. The cabin was familiar to me as I'd spent many days cooped up in similar confines. This was because it was a repurposed cabin from a high-speed interplanetary torch ship. What better way to build a radiation-shielded shuttle than to start with a spaceship already designed to operate in a high-radiation environment? With wormholes rapidly taking over the bulk of high-speed intra-system transport, there was a surplus of the old torch ships. To save resources, this shuttle and its two companions had been built from the salvaged front crew habitation module, minus the large fuel tanks and atomic drive section of those surplus torch ships. This crew compartment even still had its old nameplate Vixen. The last torch I'd remembered riding on had been Prancer. I was not sure if that ship was still in use or had been repurposed like this one, or was in the scrapyard. While they had been an important part of humanity's push into intra-system space, I found I preferred the newer instant wormholes, especially when I remembered the complete bowel purges that had been part of the needed preparations for the long, high-gravity mode of travel. I overheard Deja muttering softly to herself. She then glanced at me almost sheepishly. "I'm sorry, Your Highness, I didn't catch what you were saying," I explained. Deja took a deep breath and appeared to compose herself. "I was simply expressing my thanks. Despite the damage this war is doing to my world, one good thing has come of it." She then paused, making me wonder if that was all she was going to say on the matter. Her flickering eyelids betrayed that she was accessing her implants. Finally, she continued, "Mavers reports that these awful atomic engines, despite spewing radioactivity all across near-Mars orbital space, are also extending the lifespan of dear Phobos." "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "It was a planned side benefit of locating the atomic dynamo cluster on the trailing face of Phobos, John," Omu explained. At my confused look, the android continued. "You recall the space-borne energy array in Vesta orbit? In that array, the multiple dynamo modules were orientated in opposition of each other?" "Yes," I replied, nodding. "They had to be arranged that way so that their thrust counteracted each other. If they had not been, the satellite would have shot off into space just like a torch." I pictured the Vesta power satellite in operation, the opposing lances of atomic fire extending over 100 kilometers out into space. It occurred to me that the much larger array we were currently flying over were all orientated in the same direction. All were pointed nearly directly into the trailing vector of Phobos's orbit. The array below did not have any balancing component. "You mean we are actually moving Phobos?" I exclaimed. "Mavors estimates that the dynamo usage yesterday increased the orbital velocity of Phobos by almost 1 meter per second, Deja said. 1 meter per second? I remembered few details about Phobos, but I did know that its close orbit meant that it was moving quite fast. Omu interpreted my expression as a request for more data. "John, Phobos has a mass estimated at 10,659 about 1 E15 kilograms and an orbital speed of 2.138 kilometers per second. The moonlet's low orbit is also decaying at a rate of 1.8 centimeters per year. At the current rate of orbital degradation, the moon will break up due to tidal forces in 27.038 million years, with a 2.4% margin of error. I looked again out the porthole at the array now behind us. We were moving a moon. With yesterday's firing activity, combined with previous and predicted future usages of the facility, we will increase the orbital speed of the moon by over 0.007 kilometers per second, thus giving the moon a final velocity of over 2.145 kilometers per second. This will push the timeline of its breakup to well beyond 40 million years at a minimum. If the war and the usage of the Phobos array exceed our estimates, the moon may be accelerated enough so that it will no longer suffer from orbital degradation." We were moving a moon. You're welcome, Princess," I simply replied. Ben snorted. "Well, at least using the array at full power didn't fracture the moon instantly. As I recall, the odds of that were non-trivial. I recalled that Phobos was not exactly the most solid of solar bodies. Gravel pile in space had been a term sometimes used to describe the moon, even back before the reset. I was sure the AIs factored the risks when they decided to site the array here. I decided to just accept our luck and not inquire as to what the odds had been. Compared to the atomic dynamo field, the laboratory and control complex was almost anticlimactic. The working area for the human population, situated in the depths of Stickney Crater, was just a large room with a half-dozen deep interface consoles. When we arrived, Ben, Deja, and I did a meet and greet with the 24 scientists and engineers currently on duty. Adele had them all queued up and waiting with the main display screen as a backdrop to capture the circus. Luckily, with the ongoing preparations for the second kinetic-only attack underway, the public relations spectacle broke up quickly. As many of those I met returned to their workstations, I noticed that more than a few of the scientists and engineers had modified their shells similar to how Ux's had augmented hers. It reminded me that I needed to have a long talk with Naomi about the wisdom and safety of the cybridization process once the war was over. One good thing about the fact that others were augmenting themselves was that Uxa was no longer alone with regard to her extensive cerebral modifications. She would have other humans who understood what she was experiencing. It also meant that we had redundancy, a larger pool of subjects to watch for long-term consequences. Ux then took us into the deeper underground areas of the complex where the labs were. Here I was a bit underwhelmed, as the laboratory which Ux had created back on Vesta seemed more impressive than this one. I learned that the tunnels continued much deeper, extending all the way through the moon and out the other side. Maybe there were more impressive spaces in these greater depths. I also learned that the Phobos complex had been downsized greatly early on, as it was decided to build a second research site for redundancy. This second site was not sitting idle, as it was now being utilized to explore offshoots of wormhole technology towards developing starship engines that might allow superluminal travel. I smiled at the thought of someday sitting on the bridge of a human starship traveling well above the speed of light. The new research laboratory had been established on the large asteroid 2 Pallas. 2 Pallas was nearly the same size as 4 Vesta, but had a much higher inclination orbit. It was somewhat ironic that we'd be heavily relying on wormhole technology to support the Pallas facility, as the asteroid's orbit was tilted wildly out of the plane of the ecliptic, making travel costlier both in fuel and time for normal spacecraft. Yux also mentioned that Rami Rahat was taking the lead in developing the new lab on Pallas. He was en route currently, and when he arrived, he would be busy expanding and improving the asteroid's power infrastructure. And since he was the originator of a promising theory involving hyperdrive, he would be leading the fledgling research efforts. I also caught from the way she described his work that my ex-wife really wanted to join him in this early research effort. Now that the war had begun using the weapons and wormhole tech she'd helped create, that burden had passed on to the engineers and technicians. I realized that it was time for her to move on to the next area of research. When Adele moved ahead to set up her imager in the next area, I delayed following and instead pulled Ux aside for a more intimate chat. "It looks like you've done your part here, honey. After the forum briefing, why don't you close out your work here and go join Rami on Pallas?" She frowned, probably worried about all the unfinished tasks that remained here. I pushed further. "I can only imagine how much a working hyperdrive would help the war effort," I speculated. "It would make one hell of a weapons platform for use against the enemy. Besides, if something arises here that needs your input, you can just link in via the microcom network, or even hop back using the transport network." She just nodded, still projecting a deeply troubled look. Finally, I saw the flicker of a smile and suddenly realized my gaffe. I had not told her anything which she had not already considered thoroughly. "Well, if you think that's best, Master," she said timidly. Ben had overheard enough of our conversation to join with me as I laughed at Ux's comeback. Of course, she would do whatever was best and logical, and certainly did not need my coaxing. Admitting defeat, I just held my hands up and walked away. With our initial surface tour now concluded, we headed down to the complex's habitation ring level to have lunch. The buried habitat level had rotational simulated gravity, but only to the lower level of the Martian surface. Also, due to the low human resident population, the habitat ring was barely 100 meters in diameter. This made for narrow but long spaces with very noticeable curving floors and ceilings. Movement was also tricky due to the high Coriolis forces of the short rotational radius. Still, the spin gravity of the habitat ring was much preferred over eating sticky food back in the lab's break room, with only the moon's microgravity environment where even my shell weighed just 40 grams. At the entry to the central transfer module, Omu stayed behind while the rest of us entered the compact, independently rotating compartment. "You five, go on ahead," the android explained at my puzzled expression. "I will rejoin you shortly." I was still puzzling over Omu's mysterious departure as I waited with the others while the transfer module accelerated us up to match the habitat's rotational speed. The spin-up took less than 10 seconds as they'd apparently set the module to cycle very quickly. Ux smiled as she noticed that I was straining to hold myself in place under the sharp acceleration. "Yes, to save cycling time, we may have fiddled with the safety limiters," she explained sheepishly, "but the brief exertion helps us retain muscle mass." Ben and Deja were taking the transfer much harder than Adele or I, but very quickly the feeling of acceleration dwindled and our perceived weight stopped increasing. The outer door opened and we carefully made our way down the ladder which led to the outer ring 45 meters below. After checking first that no one was making their way up the ladder, Ux went first. Being experienced with the habitat, my ex-wife simply slid rapidly down the rungs, firefighter style. Ben and Deja went next and negotiated each rung carefully. I followed next, wanting to have Adele above me as she would be the least experienced in compensating for the increasing forces as we descended. As always, when leaving the microgravity we'd been accustomed to for hours, the final perceived gravity at the bottom felt much heavier than it actually was. Here, Ben and Deja had the advantage and recovered much more quickly, as one Martian G was normal for them. We made our way to the common kitchen and dining area, as Ux's compact quarters lacked any food production capabilities or even sitting room for the five of us. There were two others already using the auto kitchen, so we held back, just outside, waiting for them to finish their meal. When our turn came, I had just motioned for Ben and Deja to go first when Omu arrived. The android was carrying a large crate. "Please take your seats as I will be serving your meal," Omu said mysteriously. We looked at each other curiously but did as the android asked. The other two, who had already taken their seats and started eating, paused to watch what the android was doing. Omu took over the food preparation area and quickly set the machinery to producing dinnerware for the five of us. While that was happening, she opened the large container and quickly extracted a half-dozen smaller packages. From the steam which escaped 3 of the smaller boxes upon opening, they had to have been insulated food delivery units. The odor of delicious seafood hit my nostrils about the same time I noticed the logo on the smaller boxes. "Cajun Carl's?" I asked as my mouth watered. "Seafood?" Ben simultaneously exclaimed excitedly. He'd commented back during our watch party that one of the things he missed most about being stationed on Mars was fresh seafood. "Yes, Ben and Jon, the meal will be fresh oysters and 3 preparations of shrimp, along with various appropriate sides and dessert," Omu explained. "Omu, how the hell did you get fresh Cajun cars all the way out here in Mars space?" I asked. "Naomi helped arrange it, Jon, after your grandson expressed his desire for fresh seafood, and knowing of your love of it as well." "But how?" I asked, still confused. "The reason for my delay at the transition hub, to reduce the computations needed for safe wormhole shipment, the delivery had to be made to a large chamber in a non-rotating portion of the tunnel system," the android explained. Omu poured and served us each a glass of white wine and then returned for 2 large pans of oysters on ice. Next was a tray with lemon and other sauces. I was pleased to see that Omu had saved a small pan for the 2 people not in our party. They saluted us and set aside their manufactured meals. The oysters looked delicious, and Ux and I dug in immediately while Ben explained what they were and how to eat them to Her Royal Highness. She carefully sampled one and admitted that it was good. Ben then went on to explain the history of Cajun Carl's and that our meal had come from Earth, specifically the north shore of the Gulf of Mexico, near the Apalachicola Bay area of Old Florida. "You used the public transport network to bring us lunch all the way from Earth?" Deja asked with a scowl. She was looking at me as if I were the one responsible for the energy-expensive takeout. "I'm sure Jon had nothing to do with this," Ux said in my defense. Just consider this meal as a rare indulgence on the part of the AIs. I had another thought. Did Naomi? I started to ask before stopping and just shaking my head. If it was as I had suspected, the AI's capabilities were best held close. Yes, John, the wormhole generator on board Corencia was utilized to transport this meal to your present location, Naomi reported privately via my implant. Naomi's private wormhole capabilities seem to be ever expanding. I suppose you would rather I not share details about your wormhole capabilities? I asked the AI subvocally. The task of ensuring your safety and survival would be much easier if you did not, John. However, that decision is fully yours to make, the AI replied. After the oysters, we dug into the shrimp. Ux and Deja had the shrimp salad. I had a large helping of the shrimp boil as the buttery ear corn looked especially good, and Ben had the creamy shrimp garlic. The delivered portions were large enough that we all ended up having seconds of one of the other options. After the dessert of key lime pie, which based upon the small moan she uttered, Deja really enjoyed, we went to a nearby lounging area to talk. The two from the dining area who finished ahead of us were there, as were a few other off-duty personnel. After a short meet and greet with the new people, Ux got down to business. I know we discussed taking the main tunnel through Phobos to physically inspect the big wormhole generator on the outer face, but our timetable has been advanced. Due to the recent upgrades at the refinery satellite, we have received our next shipment of uranium tetrabromide fuel earlier than expected. I perked up. The schedule to upgrade the refinery had been in flux due to staffing issues. The workers must have buckled down and worked extra shifts. Maybe because of the recent failed attack? I'd have to ask Naomi to investigate and maybe offer the upgrade crews an invitation for some downtime on my island. Well, Serenity's island, Ux went on. As a result, in about 2 hours when the transport has finished offloading the current delivery of UBER-4, there will be enough functional dynamos units to power the array towards emplacing just shy of 4 tons of pungies directly into the path of the enemy arc. The kinetic attack was not supposed to happen until after the forum briefing to go over the results of the first attack, Ben said questioningly. Yes, a benefit of planting the tungsten pungies earlier is that we can include the results of the second attack method in the same briefing. The downside is that we won't have time to do the planned tour of the big array. I vote we skip the tour, I explained without hesitation. Ben and Deja didn't object, although they both shared a frown. I think they had wanted to see the main wormhole generator. How about we compromise? Ux said. There is a pre-recorded tour available on virtual, which was put together over many previous trips through the tunnel complex and around the wormhole machinery. Neo Truffles has agreed to moderate this virtuality so it will seem like we are actually experiencing it firsthand. The virtual tour normally runs just over 3 hours, but we can do it accelerated and be back here in less than 20 minutes. I looked at Ben and Deja, who just shrugged. I looked back at Ux. Let's do it. Moments later, the Habitat Ring Lounge faded away as I felt my awareness shift into virtual.